Chris, I just hear your little crinkling.
Oh, yeah, let me. Hey,
It's
everyone.
okay. Everyone's like, what is that noise? It's just Chris, you guys, messing with his headphones.
You know what it is? This isn't a very interesting way to open it, but I have broad shoulders, but a normal sized neck. So my shirts are always loose here, and they have to be,
You're
or it
always
doesn't fit
fixing
my
them, and
shoulder.
then
And
we
so you always will see me fix it because it's for somebody who has like a bigger neck, and then it crinkles against that, which is not why we're here today. We're actually here for a much more
kind of, you
interesting
know what? We want to
conversation.
get to know you. We want to get to know you more.
Yes, hello,
Um,
everyone. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of Lunch and Learn. We're here every third Wednesday. I don't know where the third and the Wednesday got crossed. We're here every third Wednesday. We're always doing a Lunch and Learn, and what that looks like is Liz and I scour the OCD world to find topics that are absolutely hot topics, impactful, and we bring on a specialist, a guest to come out and speak about it. But before we jump into that, I'm here. Oh, you're that way. I'm here with my co-host, Liz McInvale. She owns the OCD Institute. Well, I don't know, directs and runs the OCD Institute in Texas, which is a residential treatment center, one of the best in the country. So if you are dealing with severe OCD, please give them a look. And I know that they also have step-down programs, so check that out. And she is licensed in Texas and maybe some other states, or is it just Texas?
Working on it.
Yeah.
Working on it.
People don't understand. I'm hoping that will change. My name is Chris Tronson. I am a therapist here in Orange County, California, licensed in the state of California. And Liz and I both have OCD ourselves. So we're bringing that to the table. Before we jump into introducing our guest and the topic, we always have some housekeeping stuff. So remember, this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-themed related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is also not a hotline. If you're in crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline by dialing 988. You can also access online at www.988lifeline.org. And we want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. So at the end of the day, we're all here to support each other. This is being recorded on several social media platforms and is being recorded. And you can always rewatch it on the IOCDF's YouTube or Facebook videos. So let's jump into the topic. But before we do, this is also your live stream. So you can be interactive on whatever social media platform you are viewing this on. In the comments, you can ask a question. On a Lunch and Learn, we're going to have a specific theme that we're going to discuss, but we're all clinicians here with OCD training, so we'll be able to answer general questions as well. Also, let us know where you're from, where you're viewing, who you're here to support, and just say hi and support each other in the chat. But before we jump about the topic, let's introduce the third box, the person that we're staring at on our screen. So I'm always excited when I know the person, so I can give a more humanistic introduction. I'll still read his bio, but Jesse Spiegel is a therapist out here in California, and it's still, even though it's California, it's still kind of a small world. And Jesse is one of those clinicians that I know I refer to up in LA because he's really good at what he does. So we're lucky to have him. But his official bio is he's a licensed clinical psychologist treating children, adolescents, and adults. He works in private practice in Los Angeles, California, where he specializes in treating OCD, anxiety, insomnia, and behavior-related problems. In addition to utilizing CBT and exposure-based therapies, Dr. Spiegel takes a family-based approach when working with clients. Dr. Spiegel is a clinical instructor at UCLA's David Geffen School of Medicine, of Psychiatry, and Biobehavioral Sciences. He is a vice chair of the Anxiety Depression Association of America, so the ADAA, OCD-SIG, which stands for Special Interest Group. Dr. Spiegel is a graduate of the IOCDF's Behavioral Therapy Training Institute, the BTTI, as well as the Supportive Parents for Anxious Children Emotions, or the SPACE program. Hello, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the bio right there.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to throw it to you and Liz. I'm going to throw it to you and Liz. We're talking today about cancel culture. And as we all know, OCD can sort of latch on to anything that is current, anything that is new, anything people are talking about, and pretty much any sort of worry that people can possibly have. So I'll throw it to both you and Liz to start off this conversation. What do we see when we see OCD obsession specifically targeting cancel culture, and how do we see that manifesting? I know Liz and I were talking about it a second ago, how it impacts some of her clients. I know Jesse, obviously you're here to talk about it. So what are some of the things that you all see, and what are the ways that it impacts clients with OCD?
Where I would say I've seen it most is an excessive fear of saying something that could be deemed by others as hateful, insensitive, and that not only is it that piece, but that now it's going to also be put onto social media, and that the person is going to get blasted for either prior comments that they said in the past or something that they recently said that lo and behold, it's going to reach a larger audience and have a much bigger impact on their own lives.
Yeah, and Liz, how do you see it maybe manifest in the clients that you work with, or is that something you ever dealt with?
Yeah, I think that I probably dealt with it for sure, especially around, I think I've always worried a lot about if like one of my triggers is if a friend doesn't respond to me, did I say something wrong? Did I offend them? What does that mean? And that's kind of more, maybe now it's morphed things for people morphed into cancel culture because it's been something that is so often talked about is like, what impact will that have on me long term, right? Will they tell other people where they'll be? And so I'm seeing it across the board everywhere. So it could be fear of saying racial slurs. It could be fear of saying something inappropriate. It could be expressing political views. And what if, people don't, I offend someone or someone doesn't agree. I'm seeing it even as far as like, things like pedophilia OCD, where the fear is for sure, of course, pedophilia OCD fears, but then it also morphs into, well, what if that means, a video camera caught me accidentally putting my hand near a kid and therefore people think I'm a pedophile. And so not as much the fears of like, what if I'm a pedophile, but more of like, what if other people perceive me to be one and I'm canceled because of it, or that gets out. And so, I've seen people do things like walk around recording themselves to make sure they didn't do something inappropriate that they'll review later for reassurance, asking a ton of reassurance questions, right? We can see it in all different realms. But as we know with OCD, there's no one standard way that people are worried about cancel culture. What we're seeing is it's coming up across the board. But this is where the fear doesn't really end with like, what if I did something wrong? What if I offended someone? It goes more towards, and if I did, would I be canceled? Would that become public knowledge? I might not have the life I want. It might impact my future career, my future relationships, right? So that core fear that we always want to understand when we're treating OCD goes deeper and is more rooted around being canceled versus that kind of surface fear of doing something wrong.
I don't know if you've all seen this. I know, especially for my younger clients, this is such a intense obsession that they hold. And it's because they'll see one of their favorite YouTubers, or they'll see one of their favorite celebrities or somebody on social media that they follow get canceled because they said something 5 years ago or they tweeted something out. So some of the compulsions I've seen clients do is either just completely try to wipe themselves off the internet. So they'll try to delete old social media accounts, or they'll scroll back through 10 years of tweets to read every tweet to make sure that they haven't said something wrong. They'll consistently go online and kind of check their name and see like, is there something associated with it? Or they'll remember like, oh, when I was like in middle school, we used to tell certain kind of jokes, like what if I was to be in politics, or what if I was to be famous? And then somebody would find it and then use that against me. Or what if I have a good job or try to open a company? I've even had severe cases where people are like, I'm not going to start my own business because what if it comes out and then my business gets shut down? I think that's another cancel culture we see a lot in real life, in non-OCD life, is like somebody will come out and do something and people will bombard their business and harass them and stuff. So Jesse, how do people navigate real life situations like that? Because we do see cancel culture happening consistently. How do we navigate that and not have clients kind of conflate what really happens sometimes with what's going on in their own personal life?
Sure. And I think something that's maybe getting overlooked a lot is people are focusing on the celebrities that are getting canceled, and it's overlooking a lot of the more common people who are getting canceled for sometimes fairly innocuous things, or things that are done with intent not to harm. I was reading about someone who gave a thumbs up for when it was in the middle of a Black Lives Matter protest, and they gave a thumbs up. Well, lo and behold, actually that was construed by others as being a signal for the alt-right, which was not the person's intent. And lo and behold, this led to this person, this being videotaped, and this person ending up actually getting fired from their job. And it's led to a lawsuit. It's a very complicated issue. And I think a lot of people are overlooking the fact that there's a big concern also of just everyday people. And then, this is not even for those who want to be famous, but for with OCD, but for those that just want to live their lives, it can feel very debilitating. What can I do? Past conversations, reviewing, ruminating over it. As far as kind of how to go about living your life, it's trying to be mindful of what you want to do, but what is your intent and so forth. So when you're doing certain actions, maybe you might say something that could be misconstrued. However, you can't control that. And the goal with people for OCD who are kind of working on it, improving, would be to say what's on their mind and not strive for perfectionism. Some others may misconstrue it, and there is always the possibility of canceling. However, the alternative is leading a very, very narrow life where you're still not going to ever assure yourself of the possibility that something you did in the past or even the present could be misconstrued in an offensive way.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask you a question, Liz, but you go first.
Good. Here I am. So what I was going to say too is it's really important to think about what are your values, right? So if I have a client who says to me, I'm a strong Christian, my faith is really important to me, and there's times I would love to post a quote or a Bible verse on social media, and in the past I would have done that freely, but now I'm so triggered that what if I do that, someone's going to think something or be upset, but it is a value of mine to do that. Those are the sort of exposures we want to get you closer to, right? We're not going to ask you to do exposures that go against your values. But one of the really important things we want to note is okay, where is this showing up? But also, how has it impacted or changed your life? So what are things you're now avoiding that you otherwise would have freely done or you wish you could freely do? So I typically will ask questions like, Chris, tell me a little bit about, since these fears came up, how your life has changed and what are some things you're no longer doing that if you didn't have OCD or didn't have this fear, you might still be doing. Now, that doesn't mean that our understanding of the world, our perspectives, the way we act doesn't change with time, because naturally it does, right? As you become older or you learn new things or you have better understandings, we grow and we change the way we understand things and the way we live and act in the world. But that can still be aligned with our values of oh yeah, I no longer would do that, but I wouldn't do that whether I had OCD or not. But this is something maybe I really would do if I didn't have. So I'll give an example. Candidly, I do a lot of talks, advocacy talks, and I'm a Christian. I'm open about that. That's a big part of my faith and background. And I've done some talks recently at congregations. I did actually one at a big church in town, but then also at a synagogue as well. And I had a lot of anxiety around whether or not I should post about those talks. And part of it is okay, what is my platform? What makes sense? What doesn't? That's normal. But then part of it is what will people think? And what if this church has some stances that aren't necessarily what everyone else or I might align with? Will people think that I feel the same way? And then will I get, and it became this thing where I truly, I just avoided posting it when really what would have been wrong with me just posting a talk? Because whether someone has the same stance as me, I'm still educating that group on OCD, which is really a goal of mine, no matter what. And, and so I think it's being able to say, okay, if I didn't have OCD, would I have done something different versus, okay, now because you have OCD, but we're doing exposures, I want you to go post and endorse everything this church does, even if it's some of the stuff are things that you wouldn't agree with or have the same stance. It's well, maybe not. I don't need to do that. Right. So again, it's about us understanding that all the different ways this can come up and how it can morph for people, but also what is your value now if you didn't have OCD, and can we help bring you closer to that through therapy versus just finding ways to expose you through therapy.
Yeah, no, really well said. And one question from that is and from what Jesse just said is, Jesse, you were talking a little bit about, people kind of thinking through everything they say. And Liz, you're talking about trying to navigate values. If you're working with a client for the clinicians watching, or if you're a client yourself, what are ways that people can navigate that in a non-compulsive way? So how can people say what they want to say, not rethink it or think through, but still feel like they're speaking in a manner that they feel represents them morally or spiritually? And additionally, like, how do people factor like, hey, I want to do this, there might potentially be some drawback, but how do people make that distinction? I think people struggle with like the mechanics in treatment, how to navigate those tough things when it is something that is real in our zeitgeist.
And just to clarify, are you asking in the sense that the natural tendency may still be to compulsively ruminate afterwards?
Well, that too, but I think when with this one, what a lot of people will say, kind of what you touched on a second ago, is a lot of people will say, I'm finding myself thinking through everything I say. I had a client who had the fear of cancel culture, and they'll say like, I almost think like when everything I'm saying is being recorded, I like to think of that way, so I won't ever say anything that's offensive, that could get me in trouble with school, that could get me in trouble with friends, could get me in trouble publicly. So how does someone navigate still wanting to say and do things that are morally, correct for them and in line with values without then overthinking it? How do you navigate that in treatment?
I would say to some extent, it's understanding that you're going to doubt yourself afterwards, and that OCD is going to be having you doubt yourself, that maybe you did say something to this one individual where they had whatever background that they did, and that they could have misconstrued it. And understand that this is your OCD speaking. And while also there is also the possibility that, hey, anyone could potentially find something offensive. However, the self-censorship is only going to feed more into the OCD. So, we could break that down into smaller contexts, whether it's the idea of saying it to an individual, to a small group of people, like, sharing whether it's like a political view or something that's important to you, or, a religious aspect of something that you like, going back to what Liz was talking about. And then perhaps it's taking it to a bigger level of like, posting something for your Facebook friends of, something that was important to you. You attended a church or synagogue or mosque, and something interesting that you heard, while still understanding someone may misconstrue it that wrong way, and kind of taking those gradual steps while realizing you can't control everyone's perspective.
Yeah. And Liz, going back to what you were saying about values, I mean, in that conversation about yourself, right? Like presenting at something religious, like that's a value of yours. And there may be people that see that and then start to question, like, what are Liz's values? Because this church does that. So, you're in a good place in your treatment. Somebody who's starting out, that line is a lot more blurry. Like, how in treatment can they sort of navigate that to kind of land at a place that they feel comfortable with?
Again, I think the piece I would want to ask you is, if you didn't have OCD, what would you do? If you weren't triggered about being canceled, right, what would you do? And if someone would say, oh, well, like, this is my professional page and I don't talk about faith stuff on my professional page and I wouldn't do that, okay, then you may not do that. But if someone's like, oh yeah, I would post that because that was a talk and that was important to me and I think it's great, and I would want to share that, and I'd want to talk about the fact that I got to do this talk and reach all these people, then we should absolutely do that together as an exposure. That doesn't mean we start with it, right? And we don't want to do an exposure and white knuckle, right? We don't want to do an exposure and we check all the comments. We might say, okay, even if I didn't have OCD, it might not be avoidance for me to say, I want to post that, but I'm not going to read the comments because I don't really care what people think. That might not be OCD avoidance, where some people might say, oh, for ERP, you should read all the comments and lean into the fact that people might hate you and might like, that's not the ERP we do anymore, right? We don't need to do ERP where we just try to feel awful even about things that are values based. But what we do want to note is that OCD and anxiety may come up when we do what's values based, and we need to have a backpack with our tools, or whatever we want to call it, ready to deploy if that happens. And so that we know how to lean in versus ending up getting stuck ritualizing, right? Maybe over apologizing or understanding how people thought or taking the post down or things like that, and having that support so we work up to it. But again, what you really want to think about is what is the function of the behavior, right? If I'm ritualizing to try to reduce my anxiety, but it's not really for me, or because it's values based for me, we shouldn't be doing it. We're doing OCD rituals. But if we're doing something or not doing something because it's values based for us, then it isn't necessarily OCD, if that makes sense. We have a ton of questions or some thoughts, so I don't know if we want to go to some of those.
I was going to throw that up. I like Yi's comment because I think this is what I hear from a lot of people going through this. So Amanda, if we could put up their comment at both 12:12 and 12:13. So Yi says, this is a huge fear of mine. What if I had a bad interaction online in the past and that person comes to haunt me? The second part is it can end up convincing me I am this immoral person, even though evidence proves otherwise. So I'm wondering thoughts on, Yi's statement, because I think this is something that a lot of different people experience with this subtype.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing this. I'd say kind of what you're describing goes into two things that I've seen in particular, with people with OCD who are struggling with cancel culture, are a high degree of responsibility and an importance of being a moral person. And what I would say is, going back to, again, is it's important to continue living your life. And I would even say some of these things of the fears, and obviously we're not being specific what they are, I would still actually continue doing actions that are consistent with your values. And yes, like this prior person could theoretically try to be like, well, this is an example of where maybe you did something immoral. And the goal is not to have a perfect actions that are only moralistic and only in the utmost sense of responsibility, because it's an endless thing which you would never be able to get to perfection. So I would say continue to engage in behaviors, and even if this one person tried to drudge it up in this very unlikely possibility, you're still taking that way, and that could happen, and that's okay. That's part of the growth against OCD, embracing that uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, when we have OCD, we want to know that everything's going to be okay, but all of us have said things. I mean, we say so many things, we have so many thoughts, we have so many ways that we express ourselves, both in our kind of small groups and larger scales, and we may slip up. We're all human. I think that's what scares a lot of people, though, is cancel culture doesn't feel like it allots people to be human. It's very kind of cannibalistic. And so I think that adds like an added pressure to somebody with OCD, because it's this kind of like black or white thinking of, I'm going to say this and this will happen. And I always remind people, like, you can totally censor yourself to be as certain as you can, but then what are you missing out on? What are you kind of not living in life and things like that? Liz, can you talk a little bit about the part about making them feel like an immoral person? Because I think that's one thing that OCD has the power to do if we let it, is almost start to like doubt who we are as a person. And we all have parts of ourselves that we like and our family and loved ones like, but sometimes when we get so caught up in a cycle, we start to like not even recognize ourselves and help build this belief that we're this like immoral, terrible person.
Yeah, I'll go grab it in a second. But one of the reasons I love Kim Quinlan's self-compassion OCD workbook is that I feel like it just really, so one of the things that traditionally in old school ERP lacked was this need for self-compassion. And what we sometimes missed was we would do ERP to get rid of the fears, but then we would forget all the shame and guilt and thoughts that OCD made us believe were true that weren't, that we still have to like come to terms with, right? That they're not true, and bring ourselves back. And so what I want us to remember is that OCD is the doubting disease. That's what we know it as. It's what it is. It's what it always has been and always will be. And so not only does it provide doubt, like it puts doubt in your head that makes you start to try to understand it and explore it, it actually makes you start to believe that doubt. Right. And so the more you respond to the doubt OCD gives you, the bigger it becomes. So OCD throws that thought at you. So for this example, right, you're flirting with someone online, they lied about who they are. It's super triggering to you. You're feeling overwhelmed. You start trying to figure out, what, like, more about who they are. What does that mean about me? Am I a bad person? I shouldn't have done this. Maybe I really am. And OCD is going to throw a thought at you, like, maybe you really are immoral. Maybe you wanted that. Maybe you knew that the whole time. Maybe now they're going to tell other people. Maybe you're going to, right? All these thoughts OCD throws at you. the more you try to solve those thoughts, the more stuck you become. The more you do compulsions around the thoughts, the more confused you become. And what happens is now we start to think, well, maybe I really am an immoral person, right? I don't have evidence to prove that, and I'm trying to do everything against being immoral, but maybe I am. So again, remember, the more we start to try to solve or understand or engage in compulsions, the more stuck we get and the more we believe the lies that OCD is telling us. Because why? Because we're feeding them, right? So if I keep feeding the fear becomes bigger. And when it becomes bigger, it starts to feel more and more real or more and more like a possibility. And so we have to start to starve the fear, which is really triggering, right? To not respond to it and just let it be there, even though it's loud and it's hungry and you're starving it. And eventually it will start to subside. And so what's really important for us to recognize is that, of course, like, so somebody who has a fear of HIV, right? An OCD fear of HIV or bloodborne illnesses, they are doing all these things, not risky things, right? But they're doing all these other things to try to make sure, to try to understand, to try to, double check, to try to be positive that they don't have HIV. But guess what? They think they have HIV more than somebody else who does the same exact behaviors, but isn't trying to solve whether or not they might have been exposed to HIV. Right. Someone with, for example, people with bloodborne illnesses will tell me things like, well, Band-Aids are everywhere. And I'm like, well, we live in the same world and I don't see them everywhere. So you're right. But guess what? You're looking for them. You're searching for them. You're scanning for them 24/7. And every single Band-Aid you're noticing, where I might not even notice it because I'm not triggered by it and I'm not looking for it. And so again, what we're trying to teach you, and someone said, values-based work 100% has been like the game changer for them. We want to get you to get back to your values. And what OCD tells you is that, oh, you're doing these things for your values, right? So the lie that OCD tells you is that if you need to do these compulsions, you need to understand this because, oh my gosh, this is so important to me. If I don't know this, I am going against my values, which is why we get sucked in. We think that we're doing these things for OCD to try to stay closer to our values, but it's actually bringing us so much further away from them. And so the reality is we want you to start doing values-based activities, not values-based thinking. I think that's a big misconception. Chris and Jesse, I'm sure y'all seen this, but people think, oh, I need to think my way out of it. I need to make sure, I need to understand. Values-based thinking gets you stuck. We want you doing values-based actions. So living your life and not responding to OCD anymore, but remembering, of course, OCD is going to try to convince you otherwise. That's the only place it can live. If it's trying to convince you and you're like, oh, cool, thanks, like maybe I am, who knows, and you move on, OCD doesn't stick, right? It sticks when it's like, wait, what? I need to understand that. What is that true? I need to make sure that isn't true.
Yeah, Liz, and I would say actually, I very much think you make a very good point. That's not just about the cognitive framework. It's really actually the most where you'll have the improvement is through your actions and your behaviors. So, I'm thinking of someone who I had worked with, and she got very concerned in this experience with cancel culture that she'd be canceled and called out for being a racist. And she really thought of herself as the furthest thing from a racist. But again, she was concerned that, what if someone thinks I'm a racist? What if there was something that I did that, it just could be misconstrued? And lo and behold, it was impacting things that were of interest for her. She was, very, very smart and into certain literature and so forth. She wouldn't read Huckleberry Finn anymore because some of the things could be construed as racist with some of the language. Some of her music she had stopped listening to. So as far as from an actions and behaviors, well, lo and behold, it'd be practicing reading out loud things from Huckleberry Finn, or lo and behold, it'd be listening to certain music, listening to it in her home, even if maybe a neighbor could hear it, trying to listen to it in the car. Again, things of that nature, where it's still a very important piece, and kind of moving towards that uncertainty is still has to be based on what you are doing versus just thinking about it a different way.
I don't know if you all see this too in this subtype or this theme, but one of the things that I see with clients that have this fear is like an example is that a client that really, really likes Harry Potter, but has a lot of LGBTQ friends, and is like, I can't read the book and I can't watch the movie. But the way that they're talking about it in session was almost as if they wrote the book themselves and they directed the movie, and they were the ones making the statements out there that were negatively impacting the trans community. Or I've had clients that enjoy like a certain cartoon or like a certain movie that was made in like the 80s or 90s and has like some misogynistic tones to it or whatever, but it's like the client almost feels like they said it, they're doing it, I can't watch this movie, I can't enjoy anything. And I just see such rigidity in that. So what is a way that somebody can kind of like start to expand on that rigidity? Because I was telling a client recently in session this week that has these fears, at this point you're not going to be able to have any entertainment. There's going to be no movie or TV show that is passing OCD's rigid rules, because they're afraid that people will find out that they're into these things. And the things that they're into are things that everybody's into, some of the top TV shows and movies out there and musicians. And I just, it's like there's no way to enjoy anything if you have to have everything be such a purity test.
Sure, absolutely. And I would say you make a really great point. So if you're taking someone who's a big Harry Potter fan, and they're concerned that something from the books could be construed the wrong way, or because some other people view J.K. Rowling in a certain way, and so lo and behold they're restricting themselves. Well, again, there is always that possibility, and especially now with the cancel culture, because I'd say cancel culture is this more empowering people, not a healthy way for society to call out, because you're almost getting bonus points for saying things that are offensive. This is not a good thing from a societal standpoint. So you may experience, it's very possible, you may experience one person who has some backlash and is upset, and your goal is to not do that. It is not to satisfy everyone, to have the responsibility of everyone not being upset. So it is quite possible, but again, going with that uncertainty, that someone could be offended. Now, I'd say with Harry Potter, well, perhaps it is, as far as taking an action, wearing a shirt with one of your favorite characters from Harry Potter, and that would be something that you'd have to stay with for the whole day, and understanding the uncertainty that someone could get offended with that. Maybe it's posting a quote from Harry Potter, doing that multiple times throughout the week of, things that you liked from the book. Just basically kind of continue doing things that feel true to yourself. And also, I really want to clarify, what is your intent with your action too? So if your intent is, hey, you just want to share something of why you like this book and why it's important, that's the most important thing. And that's consistent then with your values too. And, you're embracing the uncertainty that comes with it, that someone may find something offensive. And if they do, they do.
Absolutely. Liz, I'm going to throw this next question to you because we were talking about it actually earlier. Cash at 1221 says, I still fear the N word, and when it appears in my head. I always had a fear of it, saying it by accident. Still know my pattern to get the thought out of my head. They go on later to say that they've never said it out loud. So, I think that's what's difficult with OCD, is it always attacks the complete opposite of who we are. So obviously people that fear saying this with OCD are the complete opposite of the type of people that say it in real life. How does somebody, Liz, deal with having these kind of fears, and what does the treatment look like now for somebody who has this fear?
Yeah, so we absolutely would not do treatment where we would, sorry, one second. We absolutely would not do treatment where we would ask you to say a racial slur, to write a racial slur, and that would not be values-based. That would not be something that I'd be willing to do, or hopefully that you'd be willing to do. And so instead we would say, how is this impacting living by your values? How is this impacting doing things that, that you want to do? And so maybe the individual might say, I find that like for example, my nephew is a person of color, and I might say, hey, I'm triggered to be around my nephew, and I'm triggered to just talk with him and call him and FaceTime with him, because I start having triggers that I might say something, or afterwards I'm asking my sister, who's my aunt, his mom, reassurance questions. And so the value for me might be to spend time with my nephew, and while I'm with him, to lean into the fact that, like, well, I might say something offensive, but I'm going to choose to engage in values-based activities right now, which is spending quality time where I'm present with my nephew, not in my head. And so because of that, I'm not going to be in my head reviewing. Who knows what I may or may not say, but what I'm going to get to do is going to get to be with him. And then the big response prevention is that afterwards, we don't review it. We don't ruminate on it. We don't try to understand. We don't ask reassurance. We don't replay what we said or didn't say. Instead, we lean into like, who knows? I just am so excited that I got to be with my nephew. I think what's really important, and I saw this somewhere here that I just want to talk a little bit about, is one of the things that we've done a webinar on before, Chris, is that we don't need to accept our worst case fears as truth. So I don't want anyone reading this to think that we want you to go around being like, I'm going to get canceled and my life's going to be ruined and I'm never going to have the life I want. That's not what ERP is. ERP is about leaning into the fact that, like, God, like, I don't really have control over what may or may not happen in the future. And so instead, I'm going to choose to live the life I want to live right now and live it fully. As Jesse was talking about, some people get canceled around things that they didn't mean, there wasn't their intent, and they might have absolutely zero control over. And if that happens, right, we can't control that anyways. You and I all know that no matter how many OCD rituals or how many things we do, if we randomly get canceled for something that was not what we meant at all and it was misconstrued, like, we don't have a chance to be able to address that. Like, preemptively, we wouldn't have been able to address or stop or prevent that. And so what we're having you lean into is what you actually have to lean into anyways. Even when you try to be perfect and never say the wrong things, you might still say the wrong things, right? Something that used to be, as we all know, language around even just, acronyms, different things has shifted over the years. And some of us might use something outdated unintentionally. And it's a learning moment to learn that, okay, that's not what I should be using anymore. I should use this. And my point is that there's never this perfect way we talk, act, and live regardless. So those of us who don't have this OCD, you're already leaning into the uncertainty. So what we're asking you to do with ERP is live by your values and quit trying to solve, understand, or feed, or get rid of doubt, because that's just going to make it bigger.
Yeah. Oh, go on, Jesse.
I was going to say, is kind of adding to that, is cancel culture is actually something that is on the minds of everyone, not just those with OCD. I was reading a survey from FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights of Education. This was, I think, about a year ago, that 6 out of 10 people are afraid to express their views for public fear of public backlash, or the whole kind of cancel culture theme. So this is something that is not by any means limited to just people with OCD. How people with OCD are taking it and, follow up compulsive behavior may have some uniqueness to them, but at the same time, the anxiety that comes for cancel cultures is a lot more commonplace.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing too, is I always think of, like, OCD is constantly like when people have like a police radar in their car and they're scanning all the time. I mean, that's what OCD is. I know that I saw a lot of this theme when the Me Too movement came out. I had a lot of clients that started to question. When I was back in college, there was times that I was drinking with a girl, or, there was times where I flirted with this girl and she ended up telling me she wasn't interested in me, and I never crossed a line, but now I'm doubting myself. And so I think when there are these kind of things and we see it out there being discussed, our brains will always try to take whatever is going on out there and make it about us. Like, I know clients with harm OCD, they'll see a special about a woman that snaps and kills her babies, and then they start questioning that. And like Liz was saying earlier, the more you start to focus on it and question on it, you think, because in real life, the more we spend time on something, the better we get at it. The more we spend time on it, the more we become an expert in it. But that's the problem, is with OCD, the more we do that, the more that becomes part of our life. So I think, going back to what you're saying, Jesse, about that article, I do think that the average person may have thoughts and feelings about this. They may own a company and say, okay, I don't want to have this flag in front of my business, because somebody might say that our business account has to be very neutral. Or, now that you're representing, I know, like for me, when I became a board member for the IOCDF, I was like, okay, now I can't say anything that I have opinions about, because it's reflecting the IOCDF. I mean, you do start to get into that head just as a non-OCD factor. I think what we always do is take it to an extreme. So based on the article, Jesse, like what is a more balanced way to handle a very real situation? Because all of us with OCD overdo everything.
Yeah, I would say the important thing is there has to be, going back to it again, is some type of behavioral actions that move towards possibility of uncertainty that something could be misconstrued as offensive. And if you think about it, often when people do work in organizations and they take more of a vocal role, someone is not going to be always aligned with them, that this is always the possibility. So I would say it's about remaining true to yourself and engaging in certain behaviors. Well, yes, again, there is always the possibility that something bad could, someone could possibly be upset about it. And if that's the case, well, you're going to embrace what happens with that, and, you can deal with it. The most important thing is, what is your intent, and so forth. I'd say if your intent is to be hurtful, well, then, we've got a different thing altogether. How if your intent is like, hey, I want to express myself, these are things that are important to me, these are part of my values, and so forth. Well, I would say it's about taking, behavioral steps in a gradual process that is consistent with that.
Yeah, of course. I agree with that 100%. Liz, I wanted to ask this question that someone put up there based on kind of what you have said is, Kimberly was saying, Liz, great point. If the fear has come true in the past, would you say a goal of ERP is to learn to lean into that fact that it might happen again? Or is it important to learn that one can cope and tolerate discomfort? So let's say somebody, I think that happens sometimes too, is we have something actually come true. So somebody has dealt with the situation and now the OCD is fixated. How would they handle it if they really did have an incident occur?
Yeah, so it's interesting because what I find is that most individuals with OCD, if any of their fears actually come true, they tend to be able to say like, yeah, like I was always so worried about this coming true, but then when it did, I was able to handle it, right? I was able to kind of figure it out, do what I needed to do and manage it, whatever it might be. And so I think it's really important to note that oftentimes if our like OCD lives in the fear of something happening or whether something did happen, it doesn't really tend to live in if it's actively happening, right? In those moments, we tend to know how to engage, respond, do whatever it is we need to do in those moments or situations. And so let's just pretend I have a fear of something bad happening to a family member and I lose a family member, right? They pass away. I tend to be able to kind of like manage my way through that and work through it and hopefully, manage OCD. Later, we would not lean into like, oh yeah, another person might die like that one family member of mine did. Like there's not really use in that. Instead, we need to lean into the fact that like, well, we have no control if and when people might die. And so we're going to do what we can and like live our life as best as we can, without knowing what may or may not happen in the future. Because you and I both know sitting around trying to do rituals or different things to try to prevent or stop something bad from happening doesn't actually work. It does, right? It's not actually really stopping whether something bad may or may not happen because that's something, again, we have no control over. So it is so much more important to do the latter, to really learn how to cope and tolerate the discomfort that things can happen. Life is unpredictable, right? We have no control over it because, again, the more we try to perfectly understand it and it for happening, the more we're going to get stuck in it.
Yeah. and I, I always see OCD in everything that I watch and do and et cetera. And one of my favorite athletes is Venus Williams, and she's like ranked at this point. She's 43 now. She's ranked like 650 in the world, and she just beat somebody half her age who's like number 48 in the world. And they were asking her what changed because she hasn't won in 2 years. And she said, I was so focused all the time on what everybody was saying. You're too old. You're not good enough. You're past your prime, that I started to believe it. And when I finally no longer engaged in that conversation, I started to remember who I was and see my greatness. And that's why I came out and played better. And just what you were saying, Liz, is people will then focus all their effort on something. So in this case, cancel culture, thinking that what they're doing is they're pushing it away. I'm coming up with these compulsions to make myself safe. But I think what we realize, either because of lived experience or clinicians, is that by spending so much time around it, you're seeing it everywhere. You're starting to see cancel culture more than the average person. It goes back to that example with the Band-Aids, Liz, where you're like, I walk around and haven't seen one Band-Aid, yet you see 3,000 a day. The same thing is, if cancel culture is your only focus, you're going to see it in every aspect. A family member is going to make a comment of like, oh, I was at work today and I said a joke and no one laughed. Were you canceled? I mean, you're just going to start to pick it at places that doesn't exist. So I wanted to bring up, because something that happened in our field earlier this year. I mean, we had a good friend of all of ours, Nathan Peterson, who is a therapist, and he had done some instructional videos on OCD. One of them being on pedophilia OCD, so POCD, and it ended up getting picked up by like a very well known podcaster, and his name kind of got dragged through the mud. And what I saw that it affected my clients, because some of my clients watch his YouTube videos, they were like, well, great, I wanted to be an advocate for OCD, and now I'm afraid of talking about my subtype. So in our own community, whether it's a therapist educating people or a person with lived experience about a taboo topic, how do we navigate that with that fear of an incident like what happened to Nathan occurring?
It kind of, I would say, as far as the goal of social media is not to have nuance. And if you look at this actually from these devices, you have Twitter, where it's like about 140 characters or less. You have things such as YouTube Shorts. You have various ways where information is becoming condensed. And so when it's more condensed, well, lo and behold, it's going to lead to black and white thinking. And also people can push a position and just actually take a piece of whatever information to try to prove something that may be completely false. And so the reality is anyone can do that. And it was very unfortunate for Nathan Peterson, who, really does some phenomenal videos where he helps explain, and I'd say actually simplify OCD in a way that's very digestible. I mean, he's very gifted at it. And you had someone who took one of his videos and just completely twisted it around in a very offensive way. And the reality is that could always happen. And again, what I really applaud Nathan for was he continues to make these videos, and he did not let that experience lead him to narrowing his base, not putting more things out there. He actually more, I'd say, went into the uncertainty. He even actually shared his experience with this, and he's continued to do things that are aligned with his values, making videos to help support people, and understanding, hey, anyone can always do this, and but I'm still going to live the life that I want to live. I want to help others, and someone is always going to make the message in a different way, even if it's absolutely not its intended purpose.
Liz, you had lived experience with this, obviously, when your interview with Barbara Walters, kind of bringing up sort of intrusive thoughts. Like, how did you, we just talked about how Nathan, Jesse, you laid it out really well. As Nathan said, this isn't going to stop me. Obviously, it didn't stop you, Liz, because you're here today. How did you navigate this from a lived experience in a public platform? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think that what happened, at least for me, when I was doing the interview that really ended pretty abruptly and bad and could have sent a wrong message, I still knew what my heart was, right? Which is like, my heart was to go out and advocate and to tell my story. And if someone else kind of told it incorrectly or kind of changed things around, that was, again, something I had no control over, right? We all know how media is. They don't totally understand OCD, and sometimes you have to kind of try to correct them, and they may or may not give that corrective statement publicly. But I think what's really important is that, for me at least, while it sucked and it was a true learning lesson for me of like how to better tell my story and how to make sure I'm telling it in a way that can't be misconstrued that way. So basically what happened with my story with Barbara Walters is that I was talking about pedophilia OCD being my biggest fear, and she ended it with like, wow, that is just so shocking that OCD can make you be that type of person. And like it gave the message that like OCD would make you be a pedophile instead of just give you the thoughts of being a pedophile. And it kind of ended right there, right after it. And so, but I think for me, at least candidly, it was like there was nothing I could do about it anyways. Like that already happened. I can learn how to better message my story in the future. And now I have an even bigger mission of why I want to still do advocacy, because it's very clear that people even doing an interview don't know what they're doing, right? Like don't know what they're talking about all the time. And so at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things where when we think about cancel culture OCD, it is no different than any other subtype of OCD, where, right, individuals with fear of bloodborne illnesses believe when they're answering to their OCD, they believe that they're at risk of getting a bloodborne illness. Somebody with, give me some other types of OCD, Chris, but somebody
harm,
with
hit and run,
scrupulosity OCD believes that they might not go to heaven or whatever their fear is if they don't do these behaviors. Someone with harm OCD believes that they might be a danger to others, even though they know deep down they're not. And so when we talk about cancel culture, I think it kind of reminds me a little bit of like real event OCD, where people will say like, well, this is different because it actually could happen. Well, people with OCD believe any of their OCD could actually happen, right? Like we all believe that it could happen and that there's a real risk of it. And that's really important to know and to be aware of. And so I think the reality is we're going to treat it the same way. We're going to have you live by your values and lean into the risk that any of us could be canceled at any given moment, but we aren't going to let that fear stop us from living our life and doing the things that are important.
Well said.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that is the treatment is the same. I think something that, OCD does a great job in talking about various subtypes and helping, people understand, where their perspectives may be. The reality is the treatment is still the same. The treatment is about embracing uncertainty, doing actions towards that, living, a valued life. And why it's caught on cancel culture in particular, I'd say that's just actually a recent societal trend. And that, if we hit the fast forward button for another 10 years, hopefully society will have moved beyond cancel culture at that time, but there'll be some new issue that's impacting society. Right. And that's going to be what the focus will be for OCD. Yet the treatment will still remain the same regardless, even if it seems like, no, but this is a unique experience and why this should be different and perhaps treatment should be different. It still is, exposure response prevention is really a hallmark of the treatment.
And it's also important to remember that like OCD did this with Ebola and it attached to Ebola. OCD does this with COVID, right? Like OCD can attach to anything that is relevant in the news and that most of us would say, oh yeah, none of us want to have that. Like, let's be clear, no one wants to be canceled. No one wants to have to deal with cancel culture. And it's gotten where like, at first, I think the intention of it was good, was to like, hey, let's not publicize these things that no longer should be publicized. But now it's turned to like ways, I mean, think about poor 6th to 9th graders right now that deal with this fear on such an even bigger level, because also their friends and the way things get canceled around something that's misconstrued, right? No one wants to be canceled. I want to be clear about that. Like no one wants to harm their loved ones with harm if you have harm OCD. But OCD sticks on it because it feels like, oh, that goes so against my values. And so I think, Jesse, what the point you bring up is so important, is that cancel culture is a current subtype we're seeing get bigger, but it's not surprising for those of us in the field, because OCD is kind of always scanning for what it can attach to. And right now, that's a real easy target for it.
Yeah, I want to throw up Liz to highlight your statement right now. At 12:47, Amanda Essie on YouTube said, "My POCD started in 1997 when there was a horrible case of a serial killer who kidnapped children here in my country." I mean, that's exactly highlighting what you said, is there's going to consistently be a Rolodex of new things that come out from society. And if we allow our OCD to kind of sniff out new things and make it about us, whatever the new thing the media is going to push down our throats every year, every 2 years, every 5 years is going to be our subtype. So that's what I want to kind of transition for the last kind of comment to both of you is this isn't going to go away. I mean, the more that time goes on, there's more ways to connect with people. I think it was harder to be, when there was only like handwritten letters that you're mailing, it was a lot harder to be canceled for cancel culture. So as people have new ways to communicate, new ways to express themselves and share their opinions, and as it seems like our country becomes more and more polarized, how do people navigate this? How do our younger clients navigate this? What are some ways that people got to move forward and not let this growing trend be another subtype that they kind of notch on their belt?
I'm laughing and smiling because of SES's comment of OCD is a trend watcher. And I'm like, it is. It's not a trendsetter, right? But like I was laughing. So I was like, that's so true, right? It is. I think to remember that OCD feels like a game of whack-a-mole for many people if you're not living ERP as a lifestyle, and instead you're doing ERP as a response to your trigger. And what's going to happen is OCD is going to keep looking for, new trends or new triggers or new things, and whatever it can latch onto, it will. But again, if you're truly doing ERP as a lifestyle, which means you've worked on your core fears, which the core fear of being canceled isn't being canceled. The core fear is what happens if you're canceled, right? Is it that you have this fear you want to have the life you want, that you'll end up in jail? Is it like, what is that fear? And if we work on our core fears, we're able to get to a place where even when there's new trends, even when there's new triggers, OCD can't stick because we're not giving it the attention and treating it as a trigger. Instead, we're treating it as a trend we're hearing about or a thought that we have. And that's the good news, is that behavioral therapy, the way we behaviorally respond, gives us the opportunity to allow trends to stay trends or thoughts to stay thoughts versus becoming triggers.
And adding to that whole lifestyle, which is such an important piece, if we take an example of someone with contamination obsessions. Well, as they've progressed through treatment, let's say they've done very difficult exposures, they've really made a lot of progress. But where it has to be kind of part of their whole lifestyle is maybe doing small things that always pushes that discomfort. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a full-on exposure at that point. So, for someone with contamination obsessions, well, they could be eating food and whoops, I dropped the strawberry on the floor. I'm gonna go ahead, pick it up and eat it. And now I'd say likewise, if we were to take something with like cancel culture, and if someone was into politics and so forth, and now they're not really sharing it, well, lo and behold, it may be about just kind of making a small little comment to someone of, oh, I read this really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal that someone could theoretically find. Maybe, they may not share the same views, but being true to yourself and just doing something that is always a little bit more on that sense of discomfort against your OCD.
Well said. My quick final thought is going to be what Yi said at 12:56. They said, this has been a great stream. I wanted more videos between the correlation of cancel culture and OCD. So I'm just glad that Yi, this was helpful. It seems like a lot of people are going through this, and I hope this stream was impactful. Before I do the final announcements, Liz, what's your final thought?
Yeah, OCD is OCD. Don't let it try to trick you that it's something more or something different, or that this one's real, or this one makes more sense, or this one is where we need to respond. It's OCD. It's the doubting disease. And what it's going to try to do is make you doubt who you are. And that's where it gets stuck. So just keep that in mind.
All right. Well said. Jesse, any final thought for everyone?
I was going to say is cancel culture sucks. And living by cancel culture's rules sucks even more. So it's important to live your life and not live OCD's life.
Love that.
Well said. We're going to beat this until it's dead. We gotta sign up for that IOCDF conference. We're so excited for it. The three of us want to meet you there. So please, if you're watching this right now, and you think that the IOCDF conference would be something that would be helpful for you and your loved ones, or if you're a clinician, make sure to head over to iocdf.org/OCDcon. It's coming up the second weekend in July, so we hope to see you there. Also, if you want to speak at our OCD conference in Spanish, I'm going to try to announce that name. Make sure that you submit a proposal.
I can announce it.
Can you say it?
Don't forget, Chris, just want y'all to know so that everyone can be proud of me for a moment. I did the original IOCDF, like our first ever OCD commercial, when I was 17 in Spanish.
En español, muy bien.
I'm going to send you that so that you can see that, so that y'all can learn more about trastorno obsesivo compulsivo. But yeah, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. Y'all are going to have to watch that.
So go to where Liz said and sign up for presenting at conferenciadetalk.com. Yeah. Next week on Tuesday, we have community conversations at 7 p.m. Eastern, current events. Liz and I will be back next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern for Ask the Experts and a cool conference preview. And then make sure that you go to iocdf.org/peace of mind for an entire schedule overview of the recordings. And you can always go to youtube.com/iocdf to watch this and other lives back. And then finally, make sure to go to iocdf.org for all of your OCD needs. All right. So from Liz, Jesse,
just because people want to see my ad, I'm going to get the link to those so that y'all can see those next live stream and put them in. So that'll be your reward for showing up to our live stream next week.
Yes.
It's embarrassing and it's good.
I can't wait. Can't wait. All right, Jesse, thanks so much for being on, and thank you everyone for coming out. We always enjoy having you here with us. Take care and go to iocdf.org. Bye.
Bye, you guys.